Welcome to this webinar, this online event from Agora Energiewende. Today it's going to be about phasing out lignite with a specific focus on the Czech Republic. Agora Energiewende is an independent think tank, and our focus is to help making the energy transition work, not just in Germany. We are currently some 50 colleagues with our headquarters in Berlin, but we also have offices in Brussels and Beijing. We are mainly funded by two foundations. Sorry, I just need to switch off my control. I have a control laptop and this just, the volume just got up and it shouldn't, so sorry for that. We are organizing or hosting this event today with our sister organization Forum Energy, which is working on similar topics based in Warsaw and has around 12 colleagues, if I'm right. At the moment, you should only see Philip Litz, my colleague from Team International from Agora Energiewende, and myself. I'm head of events at Agora Energiewende. My role is to be the host and guide you through this online event, and Philip will later on take over as moderator. And so what's going to happen today? We will have a presentation and comments for about 30 minutes, which will leave us some 15 to 20 minutes for your questions, which we hope to answer. And then by 11, we should all be more knowledgeable and ready. And before I hand over to Philip for the moderation, I'd like to show you how you can interact with us. We cannot see you and we won't see you throughout the event, which is a shame. It would be lovely to see you, but at least you can communicate with us. And there are two ways. If you check the bottom of your screen, you see the chat and the Q&A windows. You should probably all know the chat function because this is used by all Zoom meetings as well. You can use it to put any technical issues in there. For instance, if you cannot hear us or if the monitor if the screen is frozen or something, put that in there. It's not visible to the other participants and we will take care of it. Philip will put some information already inside because we will use the chat to inform you about relevant links, email addresses, etc. For instance, both presentations you're going to see in a few minutes are already uploaded on our website. So in case you face any internet connection problems, you can download it and still follow the event, the presentations. So you should have in your chat already. Philip, have you? Yes, there's something popping up. And then we have the Q&A window, which you can use for your content-related questions. They will not appear until Philip picks them for the Q&A session later on, and we'll read them out to you. We usually tell the name and the organization also to make it a bit more like a physical event. Yeah, and that brings me to the next point. We do record the event because we would like to make it available to anyone who cannot attend right now. It will be on our website in a few days. Yeah, good. I think that's it from housekeeping. And one last thing before I really hand over to Philip, we would like to get to know you a little better. And the ones who've joined our online event so far know we love polls. So we've prepared another one for you. And I will start it right now. It's about your background. And we would like to know where you're from. A, Czech Republic. B, Poland. C, Germany or other countries. And then the second question is, in which sector are you working? Is it A, the energy sector, B, industry manufacturing, C, science, D, NGOs, E, government regulator, or F, others? You will not be able to see anything, but I am. And I have a feeling now that everyone has hit a button. Anyone else? Because then I will finish the poll. Yeah, looks like everyone who wanted to did hit a button. So I will finish the poll and make it available for everyone. You should now see the results. And we see we have we have a clear majority of participants from the Czech Republic, which is good. So apparently our marketing worked, because you are our main target group today. But we also have, and it's 41%, sorry, I need to read that out, because everyone joining from the browser and not with the downloaded app cannot see the results, if I'm right. And also it's not being recorded, so I will read it out. So we have 41% from the Czech Republic, which equals 20%. Then we have from Germany 33%, from other countries 22%, and from Poland 4%. And regarding sectors, the majority is from the energy sector, a third, 33%, and then followed by science with 20%, NGOs 18%, other 16%, government regulator with 10%, and then 2%, which equals 1% from industry and manufacturing. So with this slide, with this idea about our target group or the participants, Philip, I now finally hand over to you, and the others can make their videos visible.
All right. Thank you very much for this kind introduction, Nicola. My name is Philip Litz. I work as project manager on international coal transition at Agora Energiewende, and I was also involved in this project. I'm going to be moderating the session today, and next to me we're going to have 4 panelists today. First of all, we've got my colleague Matthias, who is not on the screen yet. I only can see the background, so kindly ask Matthias to put on your video. Here he is. Matthias is leading our EU activities at Agora Energiewende. And since this is a European project on a coordinated phase out in Germany, Poland, and the Czech Republic simultaneously, he will giving us, together with my colleague Alexandra from Forum Energie, an introduction on the political background of the study and also what on the scenarios that we put up. Then as third person, we have Hans König on the podium. Hans is working for Aurora. They've been taking over the modeling work and the writing process for the study throughout the project. He's head of commission project, if I'm correct. Ask him directly what that exactly is. I'm sure he will answer that for you. And as a fourth person, we invited Karel Polonecki from Nutiducha, if I'm correct with the pronunciation, which is the Czech chapter of Friends of the Earth. He will be giving an intervention, a quick response on our key results from the perspective of the Czech NGO on that and what it means for the Czech Republic. So without any further ado, I would like to ask my colleagues Matthias and Alexandra to start. I will start the presentation and you both are good to go. So here's the presentation. And here you go.
Thank you, Philip and Nicola, and welcome to all from Berlin. Philip, first slide. So the background to this study, a few words on that. The coal phase out really is at the heart of Europe's energy transition in the power sector, and particularly lignite is in focus because it is the most emissive fuel. Now, if we look at the map of Europe, we see that in absolute numbers, lignite mining and use is highest in Germany, Poland, and the Czech Republic. And these 3 countries are neighboring countries with increasingly interconnected power systems. So there is a clear sense that if lignite phase out is progressing in those countries, it is useful to look at not only the national situations, but also at the interactions between the national situations. Philip, next slide, please. Now, a few words specifically for the Czech situation. There is a need to replace old capacities with new capacities. Question about how much of these capacities will be low carbon. CO2 emission reductions clearly play a major role in that debate. Why? Because we do have an EU climate framework, and we are currently discussing to accelerate climate action in Europe by 2030, so to increase the EU climate target, so as to bring Europe as a continent on a pathway to greenhouse gas neutrality by latest 2050. Now, as I was saying, there are interactions, particularly in what we call the lignite triangle, when it comes to the phasing out of lignite. And this is the focus of this study. One of the main pillars of climate action in the power sector is the EU emissions trading system. And in all debates on increasing the EU climate targets, a tightening of the EU emissions trading system is at the center of the debate, which means rising prices of CO2 emissions in the power sector, i.e. even more economic pressure, particularly on lignite, to transition. And now it is very important for us that we're not discussing whether there will be a coal phase out in Europe. As I was saying, the coal phase out is at the heart of the transition to a climate neutral European continent. So the transition has actually started. We have a framework in place of targets that is moving us towards a phasing out of coal. The question is, how do we manage that transition? And now again, in that context, it is very important that some of the management tools available for the national debate are currently being negotiated at the European level in context of the future European budget, in particular the so-called Just Transition Fund. And in order to access funding for that purpose to transition out of coal, member states and regions in Europe that depend on coal need to develop so-called just transition strategies. And so one of the expectations I would have on this study is to help the debate on how to design just transition strategies in the regions affected. Thank you, Philip. I hand over to you.
Thank you. I think that I may continue at the moment. First of all, good morning to everyone and a warm welcome from Warsaw. We discussed about the study that the national objectives are there or should be there, but still there is no idea how to move from lignite in a broader than national context. So our main objective of the study was to check, is it possible for the three countries to phase out lignite in parallel? And what we did in the study, we wanted to find out, will the security of supply be ensured after lignite power is shut down in all three countries? Who will be an importer of electricity and who will be an exporter in the region, and how this electricity flows and trade balance will change and will affect all three countries. And this is what Matthias said also, this is the main issue of path to climate neutral Europe and continent, how it will impact CO2 emissions, what will be the change for each country and for the region. And last but not least, we also wanted to check in the study what will be the costs and how this coal phase out will affect wholesale prices in the region. So these were our objectives of the study. Next slide, please, Philip. I would like to also mention or to show you how we approached our trilateral study. So we started from elaborating the reference scenarios, and these are, let's say, today's policies. For Poland and Czech Republic, this is NECP, and for Germany, this is coal compromise set up by the Coal Commission. When it comes to the Czech Republic, as I said, it is the developments of the capacities are based on the Czech NECP, but also the capacity planning published by CES. Nevertheless, we deviate from NECP in two ways. We see or we assumed faster development of renewables and no new nuclear plants. But I am sure that Hans will elaborate on this more during the part on key results. Then we decided to create 2 additional scenarios with faster lignite phase out by 2035 or 2033. And this was based also on discussions in all 3 countries, but also on developments of current capacities, of current resources in Poland, because this is the country where the lignite is being depleted at the fastest pace. Then we analyzed technological and economic conditions in all 3 countries, and then based on the Aurora's power market model, we did modeling, hourly simulations of the connected power system and cost optimization. And this is our approach to the whole study. And the key results will be presented by a representative of Aurora, Hans König.
Great, thank you very much, Alexandra and Philip, and welcome also from my side. Yes?
Thanks. One quick, Nicola. Before we go ahead with the results, we wanted to do another poll, if I'm correct. Or do we plan on doing it afterwards? Sorry, Nicola. I feel I'm getting you on the, I'm hitting you on the wrong foot now. So I'm just suggesting that we go ahead with the key results so far, and then we do the poll afterwards. Sorry for that interruption. Please, Hans, go directly into it.
Okay, sure, very happy to. So thank you very much, Philip and Alexandra. It's a pleasure to be here and be able to represent, to present the results of our modeling. So what you see on this chart is the development of coal power generation capacities in the Czech Republic in the reference scenario. As Alexandra said, the reference scenario broadly reflects stated policies along with an economic evolution of the system, however, without any regulatory interventions, for instance, to phase out coal. And as you'll see, even in this kind of business as usual world, most Czech coal plants retire by 2040. So we're going from almost 9 gigawatts of capacities, mostly lignite, down to 2 in 2040. And these 2 gigawatts in 2040 are really only the most modern plants in the system, the Kladno and Prunerov plants, and most of what is, or most of the older plants would have left the system by then. And actually, even by 2030, about half the coal capacities will have shut. And the background here is simply well, firstly, the age of the plants and the investments that would be required to extend their lifetimes, but then also the economics of extending the mines, which is not economic. The final point I want to make here is that this does not even include an implementation of the European Green Deal. So this assumes the current targets in the European emissions trading scheme. If the European Green Deal is implemented, that would lead to higher carbon prices and therefore to likely an even earlier retirement of coal, basically pushing this forward. We go to the next slide. What you see here is the generation mix in this reference scenario. So net power generation in the Czech Republic. So the key things coming out of this are that nuclear remains mostly stable across the time horizon. We assume the lifetime of the Dukovany nuclear plant is extended, but we don't assume any new builds of nuclear, as was already said, and I'll go into the reasons why in a moment. We also don't assume significant political support for renewables, actually. So by 2030, we have 4 gigawatts of solar and 1 gigawatt of wind installed, which is a bit above the NECP, but actually, if you look at the overall generation amounts, it's still very conservative, and we align these assumptions with a couple of the major market participants in the Czech market. From 2030 onwards, there is an expansion of onshore wind in particular, but this is based on subsidy-free build-out. So basically, what our model does here is in every year it checks whether it's economically viable to build more renewables or more capacity of any technology. And in the 2030s, it becomes viable to build some onshore wind plants without any government support, and hence they entered the system here from in the 2030s. That's the light blue bar here. The other big thing, of course, is, and you would expect that looking at the capacities, is the decline of lignite generation, which really over time gets replaced on the one hand by renewables, a little bit by gas, mostly on the cogeneration side, so combined heat and power, but then also by imports. And this is really the final point I want to make here on the generation side, is that as lignite retires in the Czech Republic, but also as the new Slovak nuclear capacities come online, in this reference scenario, the Czech Republic turns from being a net exporter of electricity to becoming a net importer around 2030. Great. So if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to talk a little bit about why we don't include nuclear, and part of the reason is clearly economic. So what you see on this chart is the levelized cost of electricity of new build nuclear and of new build solar photovoltaic and onshore wind in the Czech Republic, according to our central estimates. And as you see, even today, there's quite a large gap in the two technologies, which will only become bigger over time. You always find people who say, okay, nuclear will be cheap in 10 years' time or 15 years' time. Actually, the nuclear industry has been saying this for the past 50 years. This never really has been realized, especially in industrialized countries. So we are quite skeptical of these promises, and so that we think there's quite a strong economic rationale to not build new nuclear. The other factor here is that if you want nuclear to replace the retiring lignite capacities, which are really dropping off from the mid-2020s, there's not enough time to build this, and there will be a gap to be filled. So from a technical system perspective, this will be very difficult to do. So we don't include nuclear in this reference scenario. If we go to the next slide, I just wanted to talk briefly about the renewables potentials, because one of the points that are often made is that actually getting all these renewables or building all these renewables will require too much space. And so what we did is we benchmarked the capacities for solar and for wind, which we assume in the reference scenarios, but also actually in the phase-out scenarios. That's the lighter part on the right of the top bars. I'll come to talk about that in a second. And you'll see we have around 11 or 8 respectively gigawatts of solar and wind at most, and that's significantly below what could be built in the Czech Republic in terms of the space that is available. And the figures here for the potentials we took from quite a major study commissioned by the European Commission. And as you'll see, there's really space, at least in the kind of dimensions we're talking about here, is really not an issue. and there would even be a lot of scope for renewables to start replacing nuclear, for instance, when the existing plants reach the end of their lifetimes. Great. So much about the reference scenario. If we go ahead 2 slides actually, and start talking about what happens if we phase out lignite. As was already said, we modeled 2 scenarios, a 2035 and a 2032 phase out, and we assumed the generation that is lost from the lignite plants to be replaced by solar and wind power generation, about 50-50. So these these plants are basically built on the basis of CFDs or any kind of support system, and the government ensures that they are built and enough renewables is built to replace the generation that would have come from lignite. And as you'll see, I mean, the most important system-wide implication, or the first one I want to show here, are the power sector emissions, which fall significantly below even the reference scenario. So even in the reference scenario, emissions more than half over the next 20 years, because so much lignite retires. But in our phase-out scenarios in the longer term, they approximately half again and go down to about 9 million tons of CO2 per year. Of course, what matters to the climate is not annual snapshots, but what is cumulatively emitted. So what we have also looked into is how much is cumulatively saved in terms of emissions between the reference scenario and the 2032 phase-out scenario, and that comes out at about 100 million tons of CO2, which is almost 3 times the annual current power sector emissions in the Czech Republic, which is really quite substantial. The remaining emissions, these 9 million tons, they mostly come from gas-fired power plants that either run when renewables and nuclear power generation is insufficient to cover demand, or to provide heat for district heating. And of course, there could be one could think about further measures to bring down these 9 million tons, but that would then be the purpose for another study. If you compare it to the status quo, it's really quite a substantial change and decrease already. So to conclude, emissions down significantly from phasing out lignite. So far, so perhaps unsurprising. So let's look at power prices next. Because I think that is actually one of the results that a lot of us here in the project team were quite struck by, but which I think is quite fundamental and quite profound. So you'll see here that the wholesale electricity price in the Czech Republic to 2040. The red line is the reference scenario. The 2 dashed lines are the 2035 and the 2032 phase-out scenarios. And you'll see is that phasing out lignite and replacing it with renewables leads to lower baseload electricity prices. Why is that? So to understand what is going on here, one has to think about the merit order. So basically, the short-term marginal costs of producing electricity. Lignite has a positive marginal cost because largely because for every megawatt hour of electricity you produce from lignite, you emit a bit more than 1 ton of CO2. And over time, the cost of emission certificates rises in the European emissions trading system, and this will lead to a higher marginal cost of lignite over time, which they then bid into the wholesale market, and this contributes to positive or a higher electricity price. Renewables, on the other hand, are close to zero marginal cost, and of course they also don't emit any direct carbon emissions, and therefore they are not their marginal costs are both much lower, and they're not affected by rising carbon prices. And the impact of these zero marginal cost renewables entering the system and replacing a source of generation with a positive marginal cost is what we are seeing here in these scenarios, and this overall translates into lower power prices of around €8 per megawatt hour. So of course that's just the power price perspective. What about system cost? Because I mean there are system cost components outside the wholesale market, and one might expect that actually the renewables, yes, they are zero marginal cost, but you still need to finance them, and they require such high subsidies that consumers will eventually end up paying more. As we see in this chart, this really isn't the case, and the lignite phase-out scenarios actually end up having lower system cost than the reference scenario. Just to disaggregate the buckets here a little bit, the blue bar is the wholesale cost. So this is basically the cost of the electricity that comes from the market, which is directly linked to the wholesale price, because demand in each of the scenarios we assume to be the same. The dark red bar are the subsidies for existing renewables. So these are renewables that were built in the past 10-15 years and that have quite high subsidies. Once they leave the system, these subsidies go away. And the lighter bars here are subsidies for new renewables and also for CHP plants. So we of course in the Czech Republic a fair amount of the lignite plants are cogeneration. They produce both heat and power, and they need to be replaced when a lignite plant closes. And there are some subsidies to be paid for that. Overall, and adding all this up, we end up with lower system costs, and this basically means that the renewables we're building in the phase-out scenarios only need very low subsidies, which are less than the price lowering effect they have in the wholesale market. So the overall cost is still lower. So the system becomes more affordable for consumers than sticking with lignite. On the next slide, and this is the final of the content slides here. We're looking into security of supply, whether the Czech Republic would have to rely on imports to meet its electricity demand. And there's various ways of looking at this. In the study, in the long version, we actually show how load is covered during a particular week with very low wind and very low solar production. So that's one way of looking at it. The system doesn't go down even if the wind doesn't blow, the sun doesn't shine, and you can check that out in the study. Another way of looking at it is using import export balances. So basically, how self-reliant is the Czech Republic when it comes to producing electricity. And as I said previously, in the reference scenario, the Czech Republic becomes a net importer of electricity. The corollary of this is that its power prices are slightly higher than those of its neighboring countries, and this leads the Czech Republic to import electricity through the single market for electricity. In the phase-out scenarios, as we saw, power prices are lower, and that leads to an approximately even trade balance in electricity. So the lesson from this it's really, and we actually we say this quite a lot, because I think it's an underappreciated fact that renewables are a local source of electricity, and building renewables such as onshore wind and solar can reduce the reliance on imports for electricity from other countries. Great. On the next slide, just a couple of concluding thoughts. What we've shown in the past couple of slides, and of course what we show in much more detail in the written study, and I encourage you all to have a look and get in touch if you have any questions. As Philip said, it's on the website. The link was posted. What we saw is, what we found is that phasing out lignite provides an opportunity to both significantly reduce power sector emissions in the Czech Republic, about 50% from today's levels, and this is actually broadly in line with what we found for the other countries. But even over the next decade and much more in the longer term, while actually reducing system costs and making electricity more affordable to consumers. The main thing that is needed to make this happen is the political leadership and guidance to manage this process. Firstly, around the closing of the mines and the plants. Secondly, around a just transition, of course, as Matthias' book told us earlier, and of course the efforts are underway there also on the European level. But then thirdly, also in creating an investment environment in which renewables can be built to replace the lignite, for instance, through CFD auctions or other support mechanisms. Thank you, and I'll stop there. And I think Karel is next to comment on the results of the study.
Exactly. Thank you very much for that, Hans. Before we dig a little bit into specific questions on the results, I would like to ask Karel to give a quick 5 to 10 minutes input on our reaction on the results from his perspective. And I would like to ask Nicola to share his slides. Karel, the floor is yours.
Give me 1 second.
Well, Nicola?
Yes, just 1 second. I did open it, and I love it.
Auf Anzeige, oben links.
Yeah, no, I'm looking for the PDF at the moment, which I cannot see, and I don't know why.
I'm showing it, Nicola. All right.
Okay.
Karel, you can start.
Right.
Well, good morning. I would like to, first of all, thank to Agora Energiewende and Forum Energy, both for invitation and for whole initiative. So as I think that lignite is a very important problem from the perspective of Central Europe. I think that most of you know that these mines in Lusatia, northern Bohemia, and southwestern Poland aren't far from each other. So next slide, please. I think that it would be good to remind reasons for simulation of coal phase out. I think that beside direct environmental reasons, it's clear that climate change mitigation is the most important reason, and I think it's good to remind that according to a special IPCC report, we have only limited budget for carbon emissions, and as other studies try to translate IPCC report into possibility or need reduction of emissions from different sectors. For example, climate analytics agreed that global coal phase out is needed till 2037, and in OECD countries like Czech Republic, Poland, and Germany till 2031. So the most ambitious scenario from Agora and Forum Energy is very close to this 2031, but it seems that this scenario is ambitious but not ambitious enough. Next slide, please. Well, from Czech Republic perspective, it's rather difficult to imagine how Czech Republic will deal without lignite because 45 electricity generation and even more heat supply depends on lignite and coal, and lignite is much more important. And in official energy policy, there are some scenarios for coal and lignite decline, but not about phase out. And even in Czech Coal Commission, some members repeated that some fast lignite phase out is not possible, and this is one reason why Czech Coal Commission can't get to some agreement quickly. Well, there is some development beside policy and Coal Commission, and we can see that operators are shutting down least efficient power plants. For example, Sokolovská uhelná just switched their gasification lignite gasification plant into natural gas just several days ago, and in June, ČEZ switched off Prunéřov 1 power plant. But when we will talk about more efficient and modernized lignite power plant, it's clear that they will not switch off by markets only. Next slide, please. Well, I think that Aurora Energy Research model and whole report by Agora and Forum Energy is important from the point of new approach, which isn't usual in Czech Republic. I think it's important that model is common for 3 countries because of export-import and some assumption of interconnections. Also, as Hans presented, it was based on market and economy drivers, and these 3 scenarios were also introduced. So please, next slide. I think that it's very important to mention that in Czech debate, it's very unusual to don't count with new nuclear, and also that Aurora doesn't count with from economic reason. I think that it's good to note that Czech official calculations of Czech Ministry of Industry compare some renewable development, including storage, with new nuclear capacity, and this calculation is more favorite for nuclear. So it's good to Czech debate to come with different approach. I think that it's very important to put into debate also steep development in renewables or in the renewable sector after 2030, and it's good to see that this development is driven by market in general. So please, next slide. I think that results of model are very interesting from the point of particular decision of investments in particular sources. From my point, it's very important that that result that Czech Republic would import large amount of renewable electricity from Germany and Poland in a reference scenario, and other scenarios can show us that Czech Republic can prevent these imports only by building of its own renewables. And so I think that most of us are interested in that result that higher investment costs in phase-out scenarios are outweighed by lower system costs. I think that Hans mentioned it rather in detail. Please, next slide. This was previous. Next slide, please. Well, I think that for Czech debate are important messages that the combination of natural gas and renewables can replace coal and lignite. So it's clear, but I think that it's important to say that the share of renewables can be higher than usually mentioned. So it's the only way how to cut CO2 emissions to needed level. So as simple replacement of coal and lignite by natural gas really doesn't lead to climate neutrality. And I think that that moment that renewable energy development is important also for import dependence could be important moment in Czech debate. And for me, the main message is that renewable energy stagnation in Czech Republic is generally the most important barrier for coal phase out. And when we would like to start with some scenarios like 2032 or 2035, first of all, we need to overcome renewable energy stagnation. Next slide, please. Well, after reading of the study, I just have two open questions which I didn't see in the text. Well, I think that there is a rather probable option that nuclear power plant Dukovany will finish its operation before 2040. So I think that there is lack of operational experience with nuclear reactors older than 50 years. So I think it would be very useful to see how it would influence economic results when nuclear power plant Dukovany will be switched off in 2030 or 2035. And other question is about EU ETS allowance price, because as we see from last weeks, it's rather probable that this development will be to higher prices in next years than assumptions of study are based. So I think that these two sensitivity cases could be explored. Next slide, please. Well, it's all from my presentation, and thank you, and I'm looking forward to some questions.
All right. Thank you very much for this intervention, Karel, pointing to some very relevant points that already Hans were addressing. Before we dive a little bit into the more hypothetical question, what happens if, how does the model react if we do this and that, I would like to first of all approach Hans with a few questions on the different assumptions on the different types. So far, I've received 6 questions, and I would like to group them in at least around two or three major points that I would like to ask you to answer, Hans. The first is the question on what is your assumption, or what were the assumptions with regards to the demand as it's only slightly increasing? How does that intercorrelate with new demand from electric vehicles or from the transport sector or efficiency, first of all? And then secondly, the question, what are your assumptions with regards to the wind onshore potentials, to the study of the European Commission? Maybe you could say something on that. Yeah, maybe that's those two as the first questions.
Yeah, very happy to. So on demand, basically, and if you just look at the slides, we have this increasing from 67 terawatt hours to 77 over the next 20 years. So it's a moderate increase, and behind this is the assumption that there will be, again, a moderate electrification, especially of transport. Also a couple of heat pumps, but that this will be that this won't be a game changer when it comes to electricity demand. Again, we're assuming quite moderate GDP growth, moderate efficiency improvements. There are no breakthroughs assumed in any of these directions. It's basically, again, kind of a business as usual scenarios. What are the big uncertainties there? As was posed in the question, yes, energy efficiency could increase significantly. Our experience is that it tends to be overestimated by governments, also in official documents, and it's good to be, in modeling such scenarios, it's good to be a bit conservative on the efficiency side. And yes, of course, electrification, especially of heat as the CHPs go out, but also of transport could be much higher, and that would be an uncertainty on the upside. On the potentials, I can't speak to the details of the study because it was done by the Joint Research Center on behalf of the European Commission. But basically, what they did is they took a GIS, a geographical information system model, where they look where they look at the map of all of Europe essentially, and then put certain restrictions on this map, as in, okay, we're only looking at strong wind locations, we're not looking at locations that are close to human settlements, and so forth, and then translated this into gigawatt values of wind parks that can be built in these well, actually not just in each country, but actually they localize it quite a bit by region. So actually we give the source and put a link to the report in the full study, so you can find the details here.
All right, thank you. Coming to another theme, so to say, what about heat? So we've heard of you, and this is also one of the key questions that is often discussed within the Czech debate, is how to replace lignite power plants, which also produce heat. Mm-hmm. What were your assumptions in terms of the replacements or the capacities? Is that mainly gas? What about the role of biomass? Yeah. And also, what are your assumptions on that?
Mm-hmm. So what we assumed for this study, to be very clear, this is an assumption. Of course, policy could lead to different outcomes. Is that the heat load of these of the existing lignite CHP plants is replaced by new built gas plants. So basically, sufficient gas plants are built to meet the heat load these plants are currently generating. This is and like natural gas is likely to play some role, because the Czech Republic is quite well supplied with it, and it's quite an economic choice. On the other hand, of course, biomass could also play a role, either through converting existing power stations, we've seen this in a couple of countries, or through building a purpose-built biomass CHP stations. That wasn't the focus of the study, actually, to deep dive on the replacement options for CHP, but it's very much a conceivable option.
All right. Another point that was made was regards to the total system cost and to the not inclusion, so to say, of grids. There's this question: do we expect, or what do we expect if we set up the scenarios also with regards to the grid development?
So we didn't specifically model the grid as part of this study, simply because it was already a fairly big endeavor as it was to look at 3 countries and the interactions there. So of course we looked at the cross-border interconnections and the relationships there, but we didn't model the domestic grid. However, what I should just say, if you look at if you recall the generation chart that I showed during my presentation, even in the phase out scenarios, the renewables penetration isn't that big, and what we tend to see across all markets generally, that you tend to have disproportionately rising grid costs with rising renewables penetrations. And if we're talking about these kind of quite low levels, we end up with in our scenarios, these probably these quite likely wouldn't require a very substantial rebuilding of the grid beyond what is planned in the grid development plans anyway.
Another I'm taking a look at the watch. It's 1 minute before 11. We have like a few tiny questions left. I'm suggesting that we are going to take at least 2 or 3 more, and I will make sure that the rest of the questions will be addressed afterwards by either Hans or a colleague of mine. So we're collecting them, so make sure to get back to everybody individually. Absolutely. But we can't answer during the session. So beside those more assumption-related questions, there was also, again, this question that you said that when we follow the business as usual scenario, that the Czech Republic is following a path from being a power exporter to coming into a situation where we're going to be an importer, and an early phase out would actually lead to going back from being an importer to have more or less stable or exporting balance. This is actually pretty counterintuitive. Could you maybe elaborate again, like 1 or 2 minutes, on how this effect is actually working, how that comes apart?
Yeah, it's basically driven by the fact that here we don't just take out lignite, but we replace it with something, and we replace it with renewables, wind and solar, which have lower marginal costs and therefore contribute to lower power prices than the lignite plants they replace. If we just took out lignite and didn't ensure anything was built to replace that, that would lead compress the merit order, essentially shorten the supply curve and lead to higher power prices. But because we are assuming here that renewables will be built, which actually even from a system cost perspective are very competitive and very low cost, that leads to lower wholesale prices, and lower wholesale prices in the European single market for electricity through the interconnections mean less imports and more exports.
All right, thank you. I would like to take up one last question that was actually raised by Karl, and also bring a little bit back the European or the regional perspective that we were coming with into in the seminar. And for me, the question is, I mean, what we did in the study was basically discussing a reference scenario and also discussing a framework based on the current political settings, on the current targets of the European Union. We both know that in that sense, the study is somehow already a little outdated, because, I mean, we're already discussing on the European level the measures of the Green New Deal. So the European Commission has suggested to raise the 2030 target to a level of -50 to -55%, coming from -40 today, which is quite a substantial increase. So when we take a look at the results of this study, what would you say would be the most important changes such an increase in the target would have on the results? I mean, obviously only qualitatively, but what would you say would change?
It's a very good question, and essentially, I think the simplest way of putting it is that it would accelerate kind of the approximately the 20-year development we are projecting here into more like a 10-year time horizon. So a lot of the older coal plants would leave the system even faster because they become uneconomic. Renewables would probably enter the system even on a subsidy-free basis, even in Czech Republic sooner because of higher carbon prices, and the benefit of having these renewables in the system would also be bigger again because of higher carbon prices. So if you think about the European Green Deal and this, it's really an accelerator of a transformation that would have taken anyway in the European power sector, but will now or is now likely to take place a lot faster. And that of course means that also the political processes around this, around the just transition and so forth, need to take place faster.
Thank you very much for that. We are already a little bit ahead of the timing, since the presentations both took us a little longer, since most of the questions were mainly directed into the technicalities. Therefore, I would like to suggest that we're not getting into further detail what this means actually for Poland and the European Union and Germany, also because of the fact that we're going to have another webinar just in 2 weeks where we're exactly addressing those points. So not only with a focus on the Czech Republic, again in a relatively similar setting, I assume also with our colleagues from Forum and my colleague Matthias, where we'll be addressing what that means for the European Union as a whole, but also especially for all 3 countries in the region. So I would like to have this discussion in 2 weeks with all of you. Big thank you to all my to all the participants here on the podium, and especially to Hans and Karl for the presentation, and Matthias and Alexandra for the introduction. And by that, I would like to hand over back to my colleague Nicola.
Thank you very much, Philip. Thanks everyone on the panel, and also to all participants. There are still 56 online, so I think they would have even stayed longer. You've done the advertising part for the next online event on the topic, and I will add something to the chat so participants can see where they can register. I also included once more the links to the 2 presentations which were shown, our contact email address, and also another online event we are planning for next week. where it's on how to raise Europe's climate ambition for 2030. Also interesting, I can imagine. Just check our website or subscribe to our newsletter to always be up to date. And having said that, I think that's all. I wish you all a good day. See you next time, hopefully, and have a good day. That's it. Bye-bye. We'll stay here on the podium so you can still look at us, but it's over now. Bye.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks to all.